bit of housekeeping first. Okay, so thank you very much. Members of the public, welcome to this planning meeting. So a bit of housekeeping. If you do hear the fire alarm, please leave by the double doors at the back, go down the stairs, out of the main entrance and congregate in the car park. There is no planned fire alarm test today, so if you hear it, it's for real. One or two other bits. Masks are required to be worn at all times, even when speaking. I will give a little bit of leniency for the speakers, so please bear that in mind. The microphone will be switched on permanently, so there's no need for any of the speakers to touch the microphone, and the table will be disinfected before we move on to the next speaker. But before we move on to, and I open the meeting properly, it's with the greatest of sadness, all of us sat here know of Councillor Lewis Rose OBE's death. So before we move on, what I'd like to do in respect for Lewis and his 50 years service to this authority, I'd like everybody to stand for a minute's silence in remembrance of Lewis. So if you'd all like to stand, please. Right, so we'll get on to the main body of the agenda tonight. So, item 1, apologies and substitute. Jason.
Chair, there are no apologies tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. I move. All those in favour, please shout. Right. Item 3, interests. Previously, for the Entovens, I've declared an interest in it as a family member of mine has used to work at Entovens, so I won't be declaring interest this time as they no longer work for Entovens. So, anyway, moving on, application for determination. The first application we've got is 5.1, application number 2100500 full. It's a proposed extension to Sea Bay Buildings to accommodate relocated equipment modification to extension previously approved under planning permission 18/00919 full at Darley-Dale Smelters, Odford Lane, Warren Carr. And as you know, this is the 4th time it's come back to committee. There is some late reps, so before we move on, I'll let you read the late reps, and we've got a number of speakers on it. Okay, members? Okay, so we'll move on to the speakers. The first on my list is Councillor Paul Morris, standing in the Peak Parish Council. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. It's on. It's on.
It's on, yeah. I'm starting. Thank you for allowing the Parish Council to comment for the third time on this topic, but nothing has changed. This committee's questions, your questions, Stanton in Peak Parish Council's questions, the residents' group questions, all have yet to be answered satisfactorily. How is an increase in HGV movements of 65% allowed without investigation by the planning system, especially when the supporting transport infrastructure was and is so inadequate? This intensification has been incremental over 10 or more years. How was this allowed to happen? Does anyone in the planning cycle know how many HGV movements to and from this site there are per day? From available input tonnages, the reduction in HGV traffic suggested in this application is of little significance. Does anyone really know what the environmental effects are of this plant on its surroundings? What are the effects on human health of traffic fumes from HGVs stuck at Darley Bridge? What are the effects of off-site light pollution, not only on the human population, but on, for instance, the local bats? We are sure that they don't approve of the company name EcoBat. Or is it Enfer Ovens? Or is it Darley Smelter? How confusing. Are these names deliberate? Why do the 3D drawings production dates for this application predate those of the previous application? This apparent staging is illegal. It amounts to intensification by stealth. Why has that not been fully investigated? Don't just ask the applicant. Investigate and find out. There are many more questions, and they're all valid planning, not EA permit questions. Stanton in Peak Parish Council asserts that this authority has a duty to refuse this application and instigate a full investigation to move us out of this intolerable situation. If this committee ignores these significant concerns of the residents you and us serve and approve, then it is incumbent on you to insist on appropriate conditions, to include A Bay building to be demolished within 2 months of the completion of the Sea Bay extension, a continuous, fully auditable count of HGV traffic entering and leaving the site for whatever reason, and should include historic data. All proposed permit variations and amendments for this site requested via the EA are published for public scrutiny. These conditions are to ensure the current capacities are maintained, monitorable, and not varied without full, transparent public consultation. We also recommend that a planning contravention notice
Thank
be
you
served.
very much, Councillor.
Demolish eBays, count HGVs, and publish permit variation requests.
Thank you. Right, the next person on my list is Ms Sue Falk, a local resident to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening. Once again, we find ourselves as residents scrutinising planning documents relating to Enthovens, or is it Darleydale Smelter? Just the naming convention used for this facility is designed to make everything complex. It seems to me that as a planning committee tasked with making a decision on this proposal, you have suffered from a lack of concise information from officers, clear information you need to make any decisions when dealing with the largest battery recycling plant in Europe. As the planning authority, you should be confident that you know what the end result of any application that comes before you will mean to the residents, their amenity, their highway infrastructure, and what visual and ecological impacts will result. It's very clear that detailed knowledge of this facility, its processes, volumes of HGVs have to date not formed part of the planning decision-making process. We've seen expansion of storage via 2 buildings in 2019, just after the major 2018 application. These were just passed via officer delegation as being below a certain size, therefore did not trigger any scrutiny by the public or this committee. A facility this size gets planning permissions granted with no managing conditions, yet an application, for example, for a campsite would be scrutinised down to the nth degree. Something is seriously wrong here. When are you going to exert the powers you have as a planning authority to act in the interests of everyone, not just Enthovens? Until this planning application, very few questions have been asked when you've been presented with applications for the site. That's why it's expanded to the size you now see. Comments from the agents to questions raised by residents and parish councils indicate the lack of previous scrutiny. Their replies: we've never been asked to provide that information before and we're not doing it now. That sums up the situation. You need conditions set that don't give wiggle room. You need to demolish the A bay within 2 months of the C bay being complete, not come back with a plan and then we'll look at it and agree it. State exactly what you require and when you require it. If your environmental health officer now says they want annual reports on air quality, set a condition. Don't go along with
30 seconds left.
Would you Enthovens telephone them to discuss? Once the planning application leaves this committee, you hear no more about it. You haven't got the answers to the questions you raised right at the beginning, and you won't if you permit this application. You'll hear nothing more until at such time Enthovens come back again with a further application that fits the criteria for committee sanction. You should refuse and demand the information you have asked for.
Thank you. The next on my list is Mr. Mark Hopkinson, local resident, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening. This site has been incrementally growing over the past decade in terms of both the number and size of structures on the site and also in terms of the volume of material processed. This is clear from historic planning applications and documents which have been previously submitted to this committee. At the meeting of the 12th of October, following a site visit, Councillor Purdy remarked that the growth of traffic was phenomenal. This incremental growth has resulted in significant increases in HGV movements in the area, which is impacting the amenity and safety of residents. Until now, this incremental growth has been approved by the planning authority without sufficient scrutiny and with a surprising lack of conditions to protect the local residents and the environment. According to the committee report, this latest application is to increase the height of a proposed building to allow a larger filter to be installed with greater capacity than that specified when the original permission for this building was granted in 2018. The reason for the greater filtration capacity is not to meet emissions targets. According to the figures contained within the latest response for environmental health, the current filtration on the site is performing well within required levels, emitting around half of the amount targeted as part of the air quality objectives. Therefore, it must be concluded this application to allow a larger filter with a greater capacity is in fact to enable the continued incremental growth of the processing capacity of the site. The continued incremental growth in processing capacity will inevitably result in increased HGV movements, which will increase the detrimental impact on the community and the environment. If you approve this application today, you are approving the continued growth in capacity of the site, and therefore the increased HGV movements which are bound to come as the site capacity increases. On the 12th of October, this committee requested additional information and investigation to understand the incremental growth and intensification of activity on this site. This still has not been completed. I ask that this committee rejects this application, that a full investigation into the growth and intensification of the site is conducted, and that this information is then used by the committee to support the assessment of future applications on the site, and in setting clear conditions to limit the impact of the community and the environment of any future applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very succinct. The next speaker on my list is Ms. Laura Stevens, local resident, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
My name is Laura Stevens. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak against this application to increase the height of the Sea Bay extension. I would like to comment on the response of the Environment Agency on page 11 of the report in front of you today. The Environment Agency states that their response is linked to the permitting process and do not have comments to make from a planning perspective. They would like to thank the committee members for the opportunity to attend future committee meetings, but we do not feel this would be beneficial as planning and permits are separate regulatory routes. Members may well be aware that one, that the Environment Agency is nationally recognised as being unfit for purpose, having been cut by 65% since 2010. So for every 100 staff, only 35 remain. Two, the regulatory framework for monitoring has been cut by 55%, and therefore the Environment Agency is no longer able to scrutinise and carry out inspections, instead having to rely on self-reporting and tick-box returns generated by the operators themselves. 3, members may not be aware that Eindhoven can at any time separately apply to the Environment Agency for a variation to their environmental permit to increase the maximum lead waste tonnage for processing. That is, they can apply to have the 150,000 tonne limit removed and negotiate a higher tonnage without any assessment of the impact on the local amenity, particularly HGV movements. And 4, the Environment Agency has already determined that, and I quote, the installation is not of high public interest. Therefore, there's been no need to engage in any consultation with anyone, including local statutory regulatory bodies, including the Planning Authority, Highways or Environmental Health, never mind local community organisations, including local parish and town councils, or local residents. There was no consultation at the appeal in February 2021. There was no consultation or communication with Derbyshire District Council planners when Eindhoven requested a variation in their new environmental permit to extend
30 seconds left.
Their permit boundary in November 2020. That is why we request for the Chief Executive to convene a standing Eindhoven liaison committee, independently chaired and with invitations to the Community Group, Environment Agency, Highway Authority, Stanton and Peak and South Darley Parish Councils, Darleydale Town Council and Eindhoven. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, the next on my list is Mr. Rob Ashton, but I believe Mr. Ward will be reading out his representation. So similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Members are reminded of the following. 1. The minutes of both the 12th of October and the 14th of December meetings resolved that further information be sought from the various regulatory bodies, Environmental Agency, Environmental Health and the Derbyshire County Council Highways before determination. 2. It was clear from the recordings of the above meetings that members were not satisfied with the responses from these agencies during the statutory consultation process. 3. Members also recognised that there had been a lack of communication between the agencies about the cumulative impacts of the ongoing development of the site. And 4. Any responses received from the agencies have been limited to the individual organisation's statutory responsibilities, with no one taking overall view. This is extremely frustrating to local residents and fails to address the wider issue of ongoing incremental development of the site and its impact on the local community. We'd like to remind members that there has been an accelerating increase in production capacity at the site from 100,000 tonnes in 2006 to 130,000 tonnes in 2017 and up to 165,000 tonnes in 2019. These are figures directly from Eindhoven's. Just to break those down, They represent a 6% increase over the first 11 years for every 2 years. In the last 2 years, there's been a 27% increase. The industrial site is located very close to a national park, a local conservation area, and a scheduled ancient monument, all of which have very many visitors here to enjoy the peace and tranquility of the local environment. Surely, the organisations responsible for protecting these areas should insist upon a significant degree of protection from any further site expansion. The Environment Agency have failed to consult with local residents about various site development proposals on the basis, they say, of a lack of significant impact upon the local community. The objections to recent development plans from both the local affected parish councils and numerous local residents clearly tell you that the opposite is the case. We remain concerned about the environmental pollution from what is a 24-hour operation. We're not convinced that there is sufficient scrutiny of all limits imposed upon the levels of noise, acrid smells, intrusive lighting, vibration, and water runoff into the River Derwent emanating from the site. All new planning applications only increase our anxiety about these issues. The highway network access to the site is totally unsuitable for the size and frequency of HGV movements. There's an ongoing danger to other road users, regular local infrastructure damage, and frequent congestion. We propose that a planning contravention notice be issued alleging a material change of use so that a comprehensive and overarching review of site operations can be undertaken.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ward. 23 minutes.
Thank you.
Right, the next on my list is Miss Rosalind Griffiths, local resident to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Good evening. It's worth revisiting, I think, some of the major issues of concern of residents and their experience as well. Some of them have been dealt with.
Can you speak up slightly, because you've got a
visor
on,
I know,
so...
because I can't see if I wear a mask.
Right.
Planning consent for Sea Bay building was granted just 3 years ago in 2018. It was part of a large impactful planning application which was supposed to future-proof the site. The proposed extension to the already massive sea bay is between 5 to 8 metres in height, extra, creating an increase of between 8 to 13,000 cubic metres. This would take the building well above the tree line. Not only would this have a huge negative visual impact in this sensitive area on the edge of the Peak Park, but it would represent potential for expansion and further capacity on this already large site. It seems that plans for a building of similar height was under of consideration and written up in April 2018, at the same time as the lower sea bay plans, which were subsequently approved, were also designed. It appears that a larger building was always the goal. In addition, the inconsistencies and lack of clarity in the various planning documents remain very concerning to residents. My family and I, like other residents in Stanton Lees, Warren Carr and Darley-Dale, have witnessed and experienced the negative impact of the incremental expansion and intensification. Each new planning application and consent over the years has had a cumulative negative impact. The incremental development of the site has resulted in an increased processing of lead waste. You've already heard about the increased tonnage. The impact of this intensification is no longer acceptable. Increased HGV movement on the narrow lanes and ancient bridge causes daily dangers, disruption to residents. Huge lorries mount the pavements, causing damage to property and the fragile infrastructure. Danger, noise, pollution, fumes and vibrations are an unacceptable part of everyday life for residents. The constant noise, dust, odour and light pollution from the site is unacceptable. Residents frequently are driven out of their gardens, forced to shut windows in hot weather.
30 seconds left.
Unacceptable levels of intrusive light has negative impact. I recognise Entover's performs an important function, but currently residents have little faith that the site is being effectively monitored and scrutinised. Development has intensified to an unacceptable level and should not be allowed to deteriorate further. It is time to draw a line in the sand. No further intensification should be facilitated until the level of intensification and its impact on local
Thank you very
communities
much. That's your 3 minutes.
and the
Thank you.
environment has been properly investigated.
Thank you. The next on my list is Mr. Howard Griffiths, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes. I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak against this application to increase the height. Can everybody hear me? Because yeah, good. None of the inconsistencies have yet to be resolved. The increase in height is required due to a change in legislation in relation to the Cybele 6 equipment since the grant of permission in 2018. You'll remember that point from last time. We were able to show you that there have been no changes since the European Emissions Directive of 2016 that had to be implemented by June 2020, 4 years. You will now see in your report, under 2.1, that statement has now been removed, confirming that there has indeed been no changes in legislation. We told you that Eindhoven's complied with the European directive by installing the new Cybele 6 equipment in the existing sea bay. This is included in tonight's report on page 7 and 8 under item 2.2. As you know, Eindhoven's are now actually disputing this, stating that both the 2018 and 2020-21 office report are incorrect. As you know, there are 2 routes for development. For operational development purposes, Eindhoven's have to reply to you, the local planning authority. In the 12 applications since 2003, including this one, the emphasis has been consistent in that they claim no expansion, no extra capacity, no additional HG movements. Yet, for all the permitted use and variations to their permit controlled by the Environment Agency, the emphasis has been on expansion, proving to the Planning Inspectorate in their appeal in 2021 to remove the 150,000 tonne processing cap. They argued that in fact their processing of lead waste had increased from 100,000 tonnes in 2016 to 130,000 tonnes in 2017 to 165,000 tonnes in 2019. Both cannot be true. There is a fundamental inconsistency here. Similarly, how can
30 seconds left.
How can the 3D drawings be the same if they were done in 2018? We urge you that you refuse this application. Remember, Eindhoven's can always reapply, and they have permission. They already have permission for the sea bay, albeit at a lower height. We would like you to carry out the investigation to establish whether intensification has resulted in the change of character. We repeat the request.
Thank you very much. That's your 3 minutes.
Yep.
Right, the next on my list is Mr. Jed Ward again. 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you've 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to speak to you again. Since I last spoke to you in October, I have read carefully through all 12 planning applications received by yourselves from Eindhoven since 2003. Different case officers have been responsible for writing each report, as you'd expect, and no reference has been made in any of the reports to any previous application. Again, you might expect that. Inevitably, though, this has meant there's been no continuity. No one has taken the overview. This is what we, the community, are saying to you now. No one has been looking at the big picture. Many of you experienced firsthand in October the traffic congestion that's a regular feature of life for those of us living near Darley Bridge. Your experience that day was then underlined the next day by the contributions made by the speakers. It led you, in the words of Councillor Purdy, to draw a line in the sand and to look at this properly and in the round. We believe that this offers you, the local planning authority, the chance now to take a leadership role. We are not saying that we know with certainty that there has been intensification, only that there may have been, and we'd like you to investigate. What we do tell you is that over recent years, we've seen increased impacts on our lives and amenity from noise, from dust, from smells, with light pollution and with traffic congestion and increased HGV movements, including exhaust fumes. We ask you to try to find out if this amounts to intensification. You've heard from another speaker that the regulatory body in charge of the operation at the site, the Environment Agency, is now widely regarded as being unfit for purpose. This offers you another reason to take the initiative and adopt a leadership role. So this is why I've written to you on behalf of the local community, asking you to issue a planning contravention notice, since this is the best way, we believe, to pull together all the information you'll need to make your judgment. Yesterday, I wrote again to stress that in making this request, we're not saying that Enthovens have contravened any planning laws. The name PCN is unfortunate. The truth is, we fully respect the recycling work carried out at Enthovens. We just ask that they respect our amenity. Believe it or not, we want to coexist happily with Enthovens. My aim, and I believe that of the whole local community, is to achieve better liaison and discussion between the community, the operator, and the regulatory bodies.
30 seconds left.
Based on more openness and good neighbourliness between all parties, leading to an even more successful company and to happier, healthier, and safer neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last on my list is Miss Jane Newman, Safer Local Community Group. To speak against the application, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Hello, I'm Jane Newman, planning consultant representing the Safer Local Community Group. I'm a chartered town planner and I was previously the head of development management at the Peak District National Park Authority. Material change of use by intensification essentially means that when an existing development intensifies, if the character of the development and its impacts substantially change, this can be a change of use that requires a new planning permission, even if the use has the same broad description. This principle is not new and was first established in the courts in 1959 and has been carried forward in judgments since that time. The Court of Appeal judges in the Hertfordshire County Council versus Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in 2012 said, "It is not disputed that intensification of a use is capable of constituting a material change of use." The legal cases establish that it is not only the volume of intensification but also changes in impacts on and off the site that are a key consideration in establishing whether there's been a material change of use. In this case, the community is telling you that the impacts of the development that they are experiencing have substantially changed. The officer's report says that the nature and intensity of the industrial processes at the application site are consistent over a significant period of time, but we have seen no evidence for this assertion. It's also inconsistent with the experience of residents and at odds with the operator's own admission of throughput volumes increasing by 65,000 tonnes between 2006 and 2019. Investigation of this type of intensification is not an unusual or unreasonable request. I oversaw a similar investigation into an industrial process carried out by a multinational operator in my role in the Peak District National Park Authority. That investigation proved that intensification had taken place and action was taken to limit the harm. Any limitations placed on the development by the Environment Agency through a separate regime aren't relevant here. It falls to you as the planning authority to make a planning judgment of whether there's been a change in the character and in the impacts of the development, and therefore whether a material change of use has occurred. The local community accepts that the smelter has been on the site long term, and they're content to see it continue. However, it is their view that the development should be controlled now and in the future. It is the community's view that this development would contribute to the intensification of the site. Whatever the outcome of the application, I ask that although enforcement powers are delegated to officers, you make a resolution to direct officers to carry out an investigation into the intensification of the development, including the service of a planning contravention notice. This notice is a questionnaire sent to the operators, which they have to respond to, and would need to ask about volumes of materials processed and HGV movements. Officers would also need to collect information about impacts of the development on the local community. This information would facilitate an informed view about whether there has been a change of use by intensification. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A number of points that I'll need to come back on there. First of all, I think it's worth just reiterating a number of points that have come out of previous meetings. So members will note from the late representation sheets in front of them that the Environment Agency are the permitting authority, and they cover all aspects of likely polluting emissions from the site, be that noise, air, water or land related. We also need to have regard to the previous planning application that was submitted and approved back in 2018 for the same, effectively the same building on the same site of the same footprint, albeit not as high as the building that's before members this evening. Members have been directed by members of the public to the potential powers that we have to serve a planning contravention notice. A planning contravention notice is one of a number of tools available at our disposal to investigate breaches of planning control. In this particular case, we have a cooperative site operator, and we've asked them for information on the amount of tonnage of materials that are processed on this site over a significant period of time. And what that's established is that tonnage processed from the site has been consistent over a number of many years, dating back to 2002. And we can confirm that, and it comes out really in the appeal decision in respect of the Environment Agency permit review, that the maximum amount of tonnage that was processed on site was at 165,000 tonnes. Now that happened back in 2006, and tonnage, the amount of tonnage that's been processed from the site since has been significantly below that. So we're satisfied as officers that there isn't a material change of use amounting from an intensification of use on site to warrant alleging a breach of planning control, to even contemplate serving a planning contravention notice. We have got a cooperative site operator. They have cooperated with us, provided with sufficient information for us to be satisfied there is no material change of use of land that would warrant in us taking further action at this stage. As previously advised, we've approved a building on this site to house a new bag filter. The applicant confirmed at the last meeting that they were willing to decommission and demolish the existing A-Bay building. You'll note from the officer's report that we're recommending a condition for that building to be demolished, and a programme to be submitted to the authority and approved in writing. That will ensure that there is no scope to use that building in addition to this new building for industrial processes on the site. And we're satisfied that with the permit that's in place, there is very little risk or minimal risk in the site being used more intensively, resulting in further nuisance to residents. I'm happy to take questions at this stage.
Just regarding the PCN, and really the reason it's come back now, because I did actually at the last thing ask the question about this PCN, and I sort of thought that this was going to be some sort of, I put forward the proposition of conversation, because obviously at the last meeting there was a discrepancy between what the legal advice that had been presented with and what they thought, and obviously what the advice that the objectors, or whatever you want to call the local residents, and I thought that you would be doing some sort of conversation with them to arrive at a definition of what a PCM could be used for. Has any conversations taken place?
Councillor Campbell, in response to that question, we have the information in front of us. So we have a picture of annual tonnage that processed at the site over a significant period of time. So we can be satisfied as officers that there wouldn't be, or there hasn't been any significant intensification for us to allege a breach of planning control to warrant serving a planning contravention notice in this case.
I think that's not what was being presented, though, is it? I mean, I think the lady who spoke last spoke very eloquently and very sensibly about what a PCN is, and she explained it, and it's clearly not what you've just said. And on the question of tonnage, 65% between 2006 and 2019 on information we are told presented by Endovens at an appeal. Is that not significant?
In terms of immunity from planning control, after a period of 10 years, use of land is deemed to be immune from enforcement action. Now, the 165 maximum outputs or throughput in terms of tonnage of materials was achieved back in 2007. Now, that's from information that we've had in quite detailed format from the applicant. The amount of tonnage processed on site post that date has been reduced from that amount.
But that evidently does clash a bit with information that evidently was presented at an appeal. Obviously, from what we're told, this was information provided by Endovens. I mean, I think this is a sort of discrepancy, really, that an investigation will sort of get to the bottom of as to what the true figures are. Because obviously we're getting differing figures. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to sit in here and say I know which ones are right, but I think it's important that we do know which ones are.
I think you need to have regard to the previous appeal decision in relation to the permit review, and paragraph 77 in particular, which talked about that same throughput with a maximum of 165,000 tonnes. So that's consistent with the information that's been presented to us by the site operator. They're the best people in terms of knowing how much throughput they have through their industrial premises. We have to trust that information's accurate.
Okay, so information profile, but still, just really, whether or not it's something that we can go back over 10 years, 65% is quite a large increase in throughput, isn't it?
But it's
no?
Well, in reviewing the permit, that was their upper limit in terms of the maximum amount of material they had processed through this particular site. However, an average over a period of time, it was deemed that 150,000 tonnes was deemed to be an appropriate amount, hence why that amount was set. But it's the amount of tonnage is generally consistent over a significant period of time.
I'm not debating that the Environment Agency have set a limit. I'm asking if the amount that we started with in 2006 at 100, by the time it decreased to 165 in 2019, representing a 65% increase, is counted as substantial. I'll take that as a no. I mean, I'll take it as a yes, you do.
I think you've misinterpreted the data there. The figure of 165,000 was in 2006, so there hasn't been an incremental growth over that significant period of time. There's been variations, but variations within an acceptable tolerance in planning terms, and not amounting to a material change of use in officer's view.
Okay.
Can I just one more question? I know you're not going to give me many, so I'll forward. It's really we are back to this point, aren't we, of this building being a higher building because of the nature of the equipment. Can I just really ask why you haven't asked more questions, and why we haven't got more information about what this equipment is, in terms of, we've had so many contradictory things in the accounts. 1 minute it's Cyball 6, and I think we've even at latest got the Environmental Health Department response based on the idea that it's a Cyball 6. It's clearly not. It's some other form of replacement to the Cyball 6. So, I mean, we've got things like we've been told it's going to be less noisy. This is, as now on the last lot of it, the response from Endovens calls it a filter and extraction unit. A filter and extraction unit will have a fan. Until we know what that fan is, you've no idea how noisy it will be. That tends to usually on extraction equipment what causes the noise, and yet we don't know what that is. Is there any reason why you haven't asked about the equipment? Or?
I think there's two points to cover there. One, we're crossing over into other regulatory regimes, notwithstanding whether the Environment Agency are fit for purpose and appropriately resourced. I mean, I wouldn't want to comment on that. It'd be inappropriate for me to comment. However, they are the regulatory authority for those types of nuisance, if you like, arising from the equipment that will be installed within this building. The applicant explained in great detail, and it's set out in the report, the reason why this building is required and why the increase in height was required to accommodate the equipment that will be sited within the building. They explain in detail that it's required to allow for access under the new equipment. The equipment is essentially the same. That was all explained at the previous meeting in detail. I don't want to cover that ground again.
How do you know how do you know the equipment is the same? Is it a Cybele 6?
The applicant explained it's the same equipment,
Well,
but the need for the increasing height of the building to provide
the same
access.
type of equipment. I'm not saying it's, but it's I mean, unless I've got completely wrong, but looking at, I can't see any particular. I mean, as far as I understand, Cybele Engineering is a company. It's not a product, and that company, I can't. If it's still actually in operating at the moment, it's very quiet. I can't see any sort of internet presence for it. So obviously, someone else is going is designing something. Yet we're told that this building is absolutely intrinsic to this piece of equipment being installed, and yet we don't know what it is.
I think it comes back to, sorry, it's a bit of interference on the microphone. I think it comes back to areas that we can control in terms of our regulatory powers. We've allowed a building on the same footprint, albeit it wasn't as high a building as now proposed, but the reasons for that higher building and the impacts that we can consider as a local planning authority are considered to be acceptable for the reasons set out in the officer's report. I mean, I don't want to preempt what you're trying to say, but I think you're confusing other regulatory.
I'm not trying to say anything. I'm really asking the question.
Controls.
I'm just sort of surprised at the lack of detail. I mean, I can remember an application that I was at a meeting once and saw about from the Peak Park for a takeaway extraction unit. You know, there were drawings from the company. There was a brochure of the fan. We had, you know, a lot more detail than we've got on this. I'm just sort of surprised that, you know, we're not able to even know what it is that's going in there, and therefore adequately know why it needs this increased roof height.
I think the key difference here is that this particular use is regulated under a different regime, under the environmental permit that relates and has been granted in respect of this site. It's a completely different scale and nature of development to a takeaway. So I think the two different applications are completely different.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gamble. Councillor Archer.
Thank you, Chair. It just seems to me, listening to this tonight, that the main issue seems to be one of trust, really, and whether we can trust information. And there seems to be a definite disparity between what the speakers believe to be the tonnage, for example, and what the operator believes. So just a couple of questions on that, really, just to try and help me understand how far, to what extent we can trust the information we've been given. So we seem to be reliant very much on information given to us by the operator. And I think, Chris, you just said we can trust that information. So could you maybe give us a little bit of information about the nature of that information so that we understand why we believe it is very trustworthy, and it is trustworthy because it is obviously coming from the operator who is wanting this pass. So they are not necessarily, well, they're certainly not neutral in this. So why is it we're sure we can trust what they're telling us? And then the second question, a little bit, maybe a bit repetitive, but I think it's worth asking. There's a clear discrepancy here. That the speakers seem to think there's been an increase over a period of time from 100,000 tonnes to 165,000 tonnes, whereas what you've told us and what the operators have said, that 165,000, I think you said, was in 2006, but that seems to not match with what many of the speakers think. So can you clarify that? Why the speakers seem to say one thing about that 165,000 tonnes, whereas you're telling us something different? So are we able to clarify that any further, so we're exactly sure what these figures mean and when they happened and so on?
Yeah, I think we can trust these figures in terms of them being very detailed in terms of the type and amount of material that's processed on a year-by-year basis. It's consistent with the information that's set out and was considered as part of the permit review. So I think we can have every confidence that this information is accurate. There is a reference has been made to 165,000 tonnes. That's consistent with the information that we received. However, that amount of throughput was achieved many years ago, and throughput since and prior to that was over 100,000 tonnes. So we are looking at a use that's fairly consistent in terms of throughput and annual tonnage over a significant period of time. I think we can trust that information.
Okay, Councillor Archer. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I'm not at the last meeting. I was away in North Yorkshire, but I set the ball rolling with this, so I'll just confine myself to questions at the moment to come back for debate. Chris, can you confirm that we bear no relation to the Hertfordshire County Council decision? And two, if it was to be refused, on what grounds would it be refused? And if we did refuse it, would you expect the company to go to appeal?
It's difficult to directly compare this site to the High Court judgment that was referred to at the last meeting, but in that particular scenario, the throughput was doubled. It was quite a significant intensification of activity and the amount of material that processed on that site. But even in that particular case, the High Court judge deemed that there wasn't a material change of use of the land. So I think you can't draw parallels with that particular application, nor does it support the residents' position on this particular matter. I think we can only refuse this application on material planning grounds. We have to set aside other regulatory regimes upon which there are additional controls in place. So I think if members were reminded to refuse this application, it would be on the additional visual impacts of this particular development, or other material considerations they felt were significant enough to warrant refusal of the application, bearing in mind that we have granted planning permission back in 2018 for a building on the same footprint, albeit not as tall as the building that's now before you this evening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Burford.
Thank you. Well, you know, this application is very, very complicated, so I'll try and make my questions as simple as I can in terms of how I see things and the answers that I think I and probably others need to get. So, can you tell me, do you know how many planning applications have been permitted in the past 15 years for expansion of this facility? That's the first question. Do you want them all?
I think it came out in the comments from the public where they suggested there were more than 10 applications have been submitted over recent years. I haven't got, there's obviously the relevant planning history section of the officer's report, but I haven't got the depository of information that I needed before me to be able to confirm an exact figure. But I can. Yeah. I can provide you that information.
No reason to think that that's not.
But I'm pretty confident that's accurate information.
That's fine. Now, I think Stanton and the Peak Parish Council were the ones who mentioned this, but I think we need a definitive answer from you as to whether this application has or has not been double staged, contrary to 2017 planning legislation.
I think, do you mean in terms of the true intentions of the applicant when they submitted the original application? I think we have to trust that their motives were sincere, that they submitted an application back in 2018 that was approved. They've clearly explained the circumstances why the building needs to be taller than originally approved, and I think we just have to trust that that was, and they have explained in additional information that was submitted as part of the last hearing of this item at Planning Committee the reasons why they needed to increase the height of the building, and that was genuine. And they explained in detail why, all the dates on the plans that were submitted and the dates of the actual revisions to those plans. So I don't think there was any intention on the applicant's part to deceive committee or the planning authority in any way. It was a genuine matter that came to light post the decision back in 2018.
So I've got two more, Chair, if I may. So following on from what Councillor Archer said or asked, I don't know, it seems to me that we need some independent evidence that the amount of the material that's been processed has not substantially changed over the last 10 years. We're just getting this information from the applicant, and I need to be certain that, you know, I need to know whether it's not possible to get some independent evidence, because what I'm hearing from the residents is not the same as what we're hearing from the applicant. And then the final question is just about the Peak District National Park. I mean, there's nothing in the report from the Peak District National Park. Were they asked, and if not, why not, from the last meeting that we've had? I mean, we've had the Peak Park report on quite a sort of reasonably small campsite that wasn't in the Peak Park, and they had very strong views about that, and yet something as huge as this, we hear nothing from them. Did we ask them?
Yeah, just to clarify on that last point, we have consulted the Peak Park National Park Authority on this application. They haven't, on the previous application, no comments were received. We have, just going back to the independent assessment of tonnage from or throughput from this site. Again, I think we have to trust the information that's been submitted. It's consistent with the permit review. You've got to think that that information has been scrutinised at appeal by an appeal inspector. The information that's been submitted is consistent with what the public have said in terms of maximum throughput through this facility, and it's also consistent with that decision and the findings in respect of that decision. We also have to be mindful that the annual throughput or the amount of material that can be processed on site is capped at 150,000. That's consistent with the amount of throughput over a significant period of time in terms of the average amount of material that's processed on site.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4, I hope, straightforward questions. I'll ask them one at a time. Going back to one of the points made by one of the speakers, in your previous reports, you have told us that the increase in height is required due to a change in legislation. Can you confirm that that is no longer the case?
That point was clarified by the applicant at the last meeting in terms of the need for the increase in height. It was, from my understanding, more of a maintenance issue rather than to comply with regulations as such.
So it's no longer required due to a change in legislation?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. My second question, the increase in height, as we've heard, also equates to an increase in volume, significant increase in volume of sea bays. Do you agree that in itself, and leaving aside the role of the Environment Agency, that in itself has the potential to enable a significant increase in throughput?
It's difficult for me to comment without understanding the operational needs and of this particular facility. It increases height of the building, but whether that introduces any additional floor space, it doesn't. So whether or not that translates to any increase in intensification of use is something that I'm unable to answer. I'd have thought unlikely, but I can't comment with any certainty on that.
Okay, my third question relates to that. Have you had any drawings showing the location and design of the equipment to be installed within sea bays?
We have the bays set out on the floor plans, and we have detailed plans of the building, both floor plans and elevations.
Do they show the location of the equipment to be in elevational terms, so that you can judge how the equipment is sited within the new structure?
It shows the general layout of the building and the floor space. There's no proposals for any mezzanine levels or additional floor space. So that's capped or limited.
Right. So we've actually got no detail of how the equipment is installed. My final question: a planning contravention notice is not enforcement. It's a process for establishing facts. Can you confirm that, as such, there is no 10-year time limit to information requested under a PCN?
You serve a planning contravention notice in a moment in time to establish information to find out whether a breach of planning control has taken place. In this particular case, we have an application that's been submitted by the site operator, and they've been cooperative in providing us with information we require to make a judgment on whether or not there has been any intensification of use or material change of use of the premises, and we're satisfied based on that information that's been submitted that there hasn't been any intensification or material change of use to warrant serving a planning contravention notice.
I think, Respect Chair, you've answered a question different to that which I asked. I asked whether the 10-year rule would apply to a planning contravention notice.
In terms of establishing whether a breach of planning control has taken place, after a period of 10 years, a a breach is deemed to be immune. So I'm struggling to understand
Well,
the
a
question.
planning contravention notice is to establish the facts of a case. What I'm asking is you to confirm whether, in establishing the facts of the case, there is no time limit to that process.
We have to have regard to the immunity provisions within the Act itself, so you can't pursue a breach of planning control beyond 10 years of a breach. So the period in time on which we'd seek information will be for the preceding 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sue Bull.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the application has already been passed in 2018, but the difference being the height. If in 2018 the height was there as well, would this still have been granted, or would this have a detrimental effect on the surrounding area, irrespective of what's going inside?
Sorry, is that a question for me? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, officers have assessed the impact, the visual impact of this building, and we're satisfied in terms of all the material planning considerations that we can consider as a local planning authority that development is acceptable for the reasons set out in the officer's report. So the conclusion would have been the same. We'd have granted planning permission.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bull. The last on my list for questions is Councillor Butler. Oh, sorry, Peter, I didn't see you shoot your hand up.
Right, this is kind of, it feels to me like we're kind of wasting our time with this. There's no real need for a bigger building. All they have to do is dig a ditch under this Siebel 6 equipment so they can get the loader in underneath to fetch out the detritus. The whole thing just seems to be a canard. There's no reason for it at all. And I'm kind of thinking that we should just refuse it because they're wasting our time. They could just dig a ditch, shove it under the machine, get the machine under there, unload it. That's why they said they're doing it. I just cannot see the point.
Okay. Don't think you could respond to that, because I don't think there was a question actually.
Well, I can ask a question as well. It is actually quite a big building, and it's taking up quite a lot more horizon, and that's what's the problem here, isn't it? It's a big thing. So, like, the question is, will we still be able to see the trees over the top?
Some of the members here will recall visiting this site, and you'll note, or you may recall, where the building sits in relation to other buildings on site, and we're happy with the visual impact. We feel that it's viewed against the backdrop of other buildings on the site, and it wouldn't result in any significant adverse impacts on the local landscape. Just addressing the first point, I think if we were to simplify it, well, we can just dig down to provide access to this equipment. You've got to think, well, what type of equipment is maintaining this machine or this equipment? And you'll need things like access ramps. You might need huge retaining walls to retain that land, which in itself might amount to development. I don't think it's a case of simply just digging down to try and accommodate the equipment within the existing building, because of the impacts that could have on the operation of that building.
Yes, when we were on site, the guy that showed us round, he said, we just need to get a loader under this to empty it easily and straightforwardly without any difficulty. Now, there's a large concrete retaining wall between between the centre of the main body of that building and the big drums or whatever it is that these Siebel 6s are. So, like, it's obviously, if you look at the plan, you can just stick a ramp down, shove the loader under it, fetch it out, and we don't have to have a 2 metre higher building. It seems ludicrous that they're even doing this. Why aren't they digging a hole?
I think I'll just treat that as a rhetorical question. We have to assume that the applicant knows what's best for their operation, and the application that's before us is the application that we're asked to determine.
There's always the possibility that they're not being absolutely straight with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Buttle. Sorry for missing you off, Peter, but the last on my questions is Councillor Sack.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, got in eventually.
Yeah, sorry, Peter.
Yes, Chair, there's so many unanswered questions here and so many doubts about the figures that Eindhoven are producing. This new equipment in this will be mainly for processing more of the raw material into the furnace. Obviously, production will go up, and in case lorry movements will go up. We all know over the many years I've used this road a lot, lorry HGV movements have increased over the years. It's colossal now. And when we went on the site visit, we were stuck in a traffic jam waiting for the lorries to get through. Many years ago, it was pointed out that they should add a bridge over the Derwent further up, and the County Council and Eindhoven's should share the cost, but it never materialised because Eindhoven's, I don't think, wanted to put any money into it. But that's another issue. But the fact is that I doubt many of these figures. I'm sorry, Chris, I doubt many of the figures you're quoting what Eindhoven's give to you. We haven't had an independent review of the lorry movements, which we should have had. We want an independent review of lorry movements, so we exactly know how many lorry movements are going out of the factory, and that'll tell us how much production they're doing. And until we get that, we can't really trust these figures what Eindhoven's are giving us, in my opinion. So would you agree with that? We need an independent review of lorry movements.
I think we have to be mindful of the applications before us and the events that have happened prior to consideration of this item this evening. I think we've got to, we can only control development, and we can only exercise control having regard to the relevant guidance and legislation that we work within. I think to try and, this is an established use that's been operating at this scale for some considerable time. We can't retrospectively seek to put controls in place relating to vehicle movements. I think we have to accept that the throughput and the annual tonnage is consistent, and therefore there isn't a material change of use associated with this development alone to warrant such controls being put in place.
So what you're saying, we're completely in the dark, really. You are no wiser than what we are in the lorry movement.
I think to impose...
So Eindhoven's are really saying, you believe what we're putting in front of you? Take it or leave it. And I'm not happy at all with that. I think some of the questions, a lot more questions need answering on this, and until we get to the base of it, I don't think we'll really solve this problem at all. So I'm disappointed that we haven't got there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slack. I'll move into debate. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, members, first of all, I'd thank the public for all their succinct and well-researched contributions to the debate tonight and the other evenings that we've had on this rather thorny issue that we've had. I think, you know, as Councillor Slack says, if we'd all had our way now, we wouldn't put it where it is now. The fact is that this operation is in Darley-Dale, and it's been there several decades, whether we like it or not, I'm afraid. And I'm afraid over the three debates that we've had, and with the figures we have, whether they are believable or not, we have as Councillor Archer says, there is a point of trust here. We have to trust some of the figures, and you know, we don't really know their business. Our business is to actually look at the planning application that we have before us tonight. And I'm afraid I can't see any other planning consideration to turn it down. So I'd like to move it for approval as per officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to second that, and in doing so, I'd just like to elaborate for the benefit of the speakers, because I did ask at the October meeting for further information to come in, and I think we've exhausted that. When there's a multi-agency situation as we have here, we always find difficulty on planning committee. We've had this before with environmental matters, and I think that's the case here. So I think I have to remind you, Councillor Slack, that highways have got no objections, so we're sort of stuck with that. But what I'm going to say is this: I hear your voice, members of the public, on wanting some kind of independent scrutiny. So I promised as leader to speak to the Chief Executive on my weekly meetings on Monday to seek views as to whether there is any benefit in raising a subcommittee of appropriate agencies to look further into this and get a better relationship between you residents in the area and Enthovens. I've known Enthoven since I came to police this area in 1970, and I've never been there for a problem of any kind or known of any industrial accident or incident, except one, and that was dealt with very expeditiously because a friend of my son got injured. But the outcome, what I'm saying here, is that they've got a high reputation of Enthovens. So I think there's some questions here that need answering, Chair, and what I'm going to suggest is that I have this meeting with the Chief Exec, follow up your request, and see what we can produce.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Burfield.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm pleased to hear that from Councillor Purdy. I think that's a move in the right direction, but I do have concerns. The things that concern me greatly are the intensification of the site, and we've talked a lot about the cumulative impact, and as far as I understood it from the previous meetings, we asked for a full review and a full environmental impact assessment, and I don't think we've not had that, and I don't see how we can look at any future planning applications that might come forward from Enthovens, and certainly this one, if we don't get that. So anything that comes forward in the future, we won't have that background to look at. Now, you know, the information has come from Enthovens themselves, and they've got a vested interest in this. It seems to me that no one's looking and has looked at the bigger picture, and that's what I think has been lacking. As I say, I'm pleased to hear what Councillor Purdy's offering. I think that's a good thing. And I go along with what Mr. Ward said. And, you know, he was very magnanimous in the fact that he said that, you know, the residents need to live in harmony with Enthovens. But my final point, and just to throw out, is that I wouldn't normally say this, but if we were to refuse this application, at least it would go to an appeal, and then we might have a chance of actually somebody looking at it completely independently and asking for every little bit of evidence before they come to a decision. So I think that's the way forward, my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Burfield. Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, Chair. Before I speak to the proposal, I want to really raise, I'll call it a point of order, that is something I'd like your ruling on. There are a number of related issues here, of which the determination of the planning application itself is one. I would like to make 2 further recommendations, and I can tell you what they are, but I would like to make 2 further recommendations in addition to us reaching a decision on the planning application. I can't make those as an amendment, because that would get us into a bit of a hiatus. Would you be happy if I proposed 2 further recommendations and we voted, if there were a seconder, and we voted on each of them separately?
Yeah, I think we need to know what you're proposing first, Councillor O'Brien.
Well, my first proposal relates to the offer by Councillor Purdy, but I'd like the committee to formalise that. And my second recommendation would relate to a planning contravention notice, and then I would take a decision on the planning application itself separately.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Ryan. I think what we've got to glean from this is Councillor Purdy's already made the offer to take that up with the Chief Executive. So I think that fails. and also the planning contravention notice, and you've heard from the office as well. That can't be done, so no, I won't add those. Thank you very much. So moving on, Councillor Gamble.
Well, I would have seconded those recommendations from Councillor O'Brien. I thought they were eminently sensible, and I think to formalise something would be a statement to residents that we were taking their concerns seriously. But anyway, there we go. Just a couple of comments, really. The idea, I think, that there's just some of the we have a drawing with some bays and there's no more floor space, means that there can be no more throughput. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. Throughput, they already say they're creating a piece of equipment that can deal with increased volume. I would argue you can create more output by putting higher rates of volume through. You don't necessarily need more storage to do that. I don't particularly see that as being needed. And also, I think the thing that's lacking, we talked about expertise. The expertise missing here that goes on from Councillor Buttle's points is the expertise of the people actually designing this equipment. I can't believe that we haven't got a drawing from the person designing this equipment. We are often asked for planning applications to put in design drawings. We do industrial extraction. I can't see why that company couldn't have been asked to do exactly the same thing. We've done it sometimes with much smaller applications than this. And it is deemed by other authorities to be part of the process, particularly when this building is being designed for the piece of equipment. And again, I would have liked, along Councillor Buttle's arguments, an actual technical expert opinion on whether something could have been done within the existing heights to actually still actually that equipment to operate in the way that it needs to operate. You know, that's what engineers who do industrial design do. It's their expertise. You know, you work within confines. We do that all the time. Sometimes it's the nature of the building. You have to design something to the building. We've done that. You know, we've done old things in old barns where you have to do it to the millimetre and things. So, you know, I'm sure this company could have been asked this question, and I would have much rather have seen an answer from there than just, you know, a planning officer with respect, who I don't think has any history in industrial extraction and could really give, you know, the detailed answer that the person who presumably is designing this equipment does have that expertise could have given. I think that would have been a welcome addition to the process. And again, I'd just agree with Councillor Slack as well, saying that the number of questions we have here that just aren't answered. I don't see really, I mean, how we can take a positive decision on this, no, with the lack of information that we have, and I'm sorry, I can't support it.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gamble. The last person on my list before we go to the vote is Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, has anybody second Councillor O'Brien's amendments? Our second Councillor O'Brien's amendments.
They weren't amendments, they were recommendations. So
Recommendations, I thought they suggested amendments.
They weren't moved as amendments.
Yeah. Can we move them into amendments then, Chair?
No, because I've got a substantive motion on the table, and it's entirely up to the mover and the seconder of the substantive motion as to whether that's allowed or not.
Because they were good amendments and that, I thought they did. Why can't they be amendments, Chair?
Chair, as a point of order, Chair, please. I raised my questions as a point of order, if you recall.
Strictly speaking, Councillor O'Brien, it's not a point of order. If you look at the Constitution, what you're raising is not a point of order. No. What you're challenging, if I may say, seems to be my word. I've given my word, I'm on film, that I will undertake to speak to the Chief Executive with a view to speaking to the appropriate officers to seek, hopefully, a subcommittee being raised to look further into this. I said previously a line has been drawn in the sand, and I think we've reached a point for the benefit of the residents where the agencies, the officers need to come together to look further into this. As far as I'm concerned, we have no material reasons here to give a refusal.
Can I ask Councillor Purdy then, please, when he meets the County Council to discuss next week, is the meeting next week Birdie.
Peter, I've just said I'm going to speak to the chief exec next Monday.
Yeah,
So-
will you take on board then also and try and resurrect the bridge, a new bridge to be
I
put
will
in?
speak to David
That is
Arnold.
really essential.
I will speak to David Arnold and
Yeah.
said the appropriate officers.
Because it's amazing how that
I will.
old bridge, they must have been good
I-
builders many years ago.
I will.
Darley Bridge has stood up to all that heavy goods going over there and flooding. One day it's going to collapse. It's only a matter of time. It's bound to collapse eventually. So there needs a new bridge to be put in. So that's the priority really, and it will take a lot of the danger
Councillor Slack,
away
all I
from
can
Darley,
promise to
Darley
do,
Bridge.
all I can promise to do is undertake to speak to the chief exec and the appropriate officers. I can't
Yeah.
promise to put bridges in.
Thank you. If you take that on board, yeah, thank you. That's a good move, that is. But I'm still not very happy with. There's so many unanswered questions, and I'm not happy with it at all. So I won't be supporting it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lack. So it's been moved and seconded for approval as set out in the report. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So that's been carried. So it's been approved. So now we'll have a 10-minute recess. I'll say 10 minutes. Come back at 25 to 8. Thank you very much. she's not throwing a spanner in the works again, has he? Anyway, members, if we could be seated, then we'll carry on. We've got 3 more items to do. Right, members, thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is 5.2. It's application number 21/011004, 1 The Flats, Wyneston Road, Ashbourne. Retention and improvements to access and driveway. Of course, this has come back to committee as we deferred it last time. So there is no speakers on this. There is no late representation, so I'll go straight over to the officer.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important just to remind members the reason that this item was deferred at the last meeting. So the application was deferred to a future meeting to allow further discussions about the options available to address the objections raised by the Highway Authority. And members will recall a number of options relating to the closure of the existing access and also a proposal that involved a joint venture between the application site and the neighbouring dwelling on this particular site. The applicants, through their agents, have provided us with further information on both scenarios and the options open to them, and you'll see that at section 2.2 of the officer's report. We've reflected on that, and we've basically asked members to determine the application as submitted, because it's clear that the proposals to close the existing access, which doesn't fall within the applicant's control, and to introduce additional land to result in a shared access arrangement would result in a different description and nature of development that we can't consider as part of this particular application. So for reasons previously set out, we're recommending that the application be approved as per the officer recommendation. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Members, questions? Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got one question. I hope it's quite straightforward. So, am I correct that Derbyshire County Council Highways are still recommending refusal of this application as it stands before us tonight?
That's correct. The Highway Authority have recommended refusal, but they do accept the council's position on its assessment of the application. What they're saying is that the proposed access is substandard in highway terms, but it's a better access than the existing access. However, they would only support the application if that existing access was closed, so there was some betterment in highway safety terms.
Okay. Councillor Gamble.
Can I just ask, as part of the assessment that you made towards this as a highway safety issue, did you assess this from the viewpoint of other road users other than the applicant?
The assessment is made on the basis of the information that's been submitted. The applicant has commissioned an independent, well, you probably can't call it an independent because it was commissioned by the applicant, but they've carried out an assessment of this application and presented us with a highway assessment, which was conducted, I believe, by Bancroft Consulting, and they are of the opinion that this access is better scenario than the continued use, intensification of the existing access in highway safety terms, and officers have come to the same conclusion.
Sorry, if I could just a little bit more clarification on what exactly, who the Bancroft agents are saying it's more safe for. Are they saying it's more safe for the applicant themselves to use, or are they saying it's safer for other road users?
In very sort of simple terms, the access offers greater visibility onto the merging highway. Therefore, you could argue, well, there could be improvements to both the users of the access and other road users if there's that increased visibility. So, whilst it's substandard in highway safety terms, it's a better access than the existing access, albeit we have no control on being able to close that access. So we're left with 2 substandard accesses, but a reduction in the amount of traffic that would use the existing access and slight betterment in terms of the new access that's proposed to serve the dwelling that's subject to this application.
Did you consider, from other road users' perspective, that obviously now you've not been able to close off the other access? Have you considered that from the viewpoint of now that road users have to look out for two accesses rather than the one?
That's a consideration, because obviously you've got two accesses in close proximity to one another. But the logic behind the highway consultant's findings and also the officer's findings is that there is a reduction overall in the amount of traffic using that existing access. We can't secure its closure because the access falls outside of the applicant's control. It serves agricultural land beyond and an additional dwelling house. So what we're saying in our recommendation is there's a reduction in the amount of traffic using that substandard access. The new access will take some of that traffic away and will provide greater visibility onto the highway, and hence why we consider there to be some betterment in highway safety terms.
And that's for other road users? Because I think slightly the improved accessing thing isn't really an issue for other road users, is it? Other road users are going to have to come on that road and now navigate the fact that there could be vehicles coming out of two places rather than one.
I think from approaching in the Ashbourne direction, you'd have greater visibility, so you'd be able to see an emerging vehicle much sooner from the new access. So you could say, well, that's an improvement on the existing situation. But it doesn't restrict the use of the existing access, albeit the amount of traffic using that will be reduced.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, two or three questions here, which I'll ask separately. Can you confirm that the statement in paragraph 2.2 of the report, part 1, namely that Highway Authority agreed that the new access was an improvement on the existing access and that there would be an improvement in the highway safety? Do you agree that that is incorrect?
I think that's comments made by the applicant's agent. I think you have to, if you want the view of the local highway authority, you need to go to section 5.2 of the report, and their view is clear that the access is only acceptable if the permanent access is closed. So that's views from the applicant's agent, but what they're saying there is that the existing access is an improvement on the existing access, which it is in visibility terms, but it's only betterment and acceptable to the highway authority if that existing access is closed.
Well, I want to press you on that, Chris, if you don't mind, because you do say in paragraph 2.3, given the above, and then you go on to say why you think the application should be approved. You say, given the above, i.e. given the comments from the applicant, whereas my contention would be that paragraph 1 of the applicant is incorrect.
Yeah, I think you need to have regard to the reason for deferment and the options that have been presented and why they've been dismissed by the agent in coming to that conclusion. So given the above, given those options aren't available, all we can do is ask you to assess the application as submitted, and that's what we're asking you to do.
Okay, a second question. In 2017, we gave, or the authority gave, planning permission for a new garage and residential accommodation, and this, which is now being constructed, and this new access serves that new garage and accommodation. But can you confirm that the application that was approved in May 2017 clearly showed that the access would be by the existing access rather than by a new one?
The proposal at the time wouldn't have included the access that wasn't in existence at that time, so it would have utilised the existing access at that time.
So the proposal, the garage and residential accommodation on the application clearly showed that it used the existing access.
Well, this access wasn't lawful or wasn't, as far as I'm aware, implemented at that time.
Right. Now, you say that the implication of what you said in your introduction, Chris, was that you have not consulted with the owner of number 2, the flats, subsequent to the deferral. Can you also confirm that there was no consultation with the neighbours as part of this planning application?
Just to clarify, the applicant set out the options and their feasibility. That's not work that the local authorities undertake, and they've had regard to the debate at the last meeting, and they've sought to address the comments that were made directly. So just to clarify, those are the agent's comments. In terms of consultation, there's a consultation sheet submitted with all applications, and we publish that online. So we consulted the parish council, the ward member, and the highway authority. But looking at the consultation list, it doesn't look as though any neighbours were consulted on the application. But when you look at the application site area includes the access on its own. So the red edge application site area is limited to the access that's been formed. So in accordance with our approved protocol for carrying out neighbour publicity, we would only consult properties within 10 metres of the application site area. We do more than the statutory minimum because we put up a notice on site as well. So we've erected a notice. The statutory requirement is for an either or. As an authority, we do more than the statutory minimum because we consult neighbours within 10 metres of the application site, but that doesn't apply here.
So you're saying that you neither contacted the occupant of number 2, the flats, subsequent to deferral, but nor did you consult them on the original application. Is that correct?
We consulted them we carried out publicity by method of site notice, so they would have been able to see the site notice. But it's not a requirement.
But you didn't consult them, is what I'm asking.
No, in accordance with our approved protocol, no.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, now that Highways haven't actually said they approve this in any way, but you quoted that as an improvement. Are you entirely happy now recommending the application to be passed?
I don't think we'd have presented this to you in the format that we have if we weren't happy with the impacts of this development on highway safety. We've got a highway consultant that's looked at this and presented their professional opinion. As officers, we've taken a pragmatic view, and we've recognised some betterment from the existing access and some reduction of traffic using the existing access. So we consider there to be an improvement to the extent that we don't feel that highway objection could be sustained in this case.
Yeah, so you're happy that it's to approve it?
Yes.
Yeah. If there's no more questions, I'll move it, Chair, but there might be some more questions yet.
Right, I've got some more questions still. So, Councillor Buttle.
Thank you very much, Chair. When we asked whether or not we could get the people in number 2 to use the hatched area to access the main road, did we kind of give a nod for putting more houses onto that road? Now, once we've said that, yes, we're okay with number 2 accessing that, does that mean the area on the map, the one with the pond or the one that's marked as death, is liable to make a reasonable claim on being able to use that track to access that road for further development in the future?
That's a question that's not relevant to the assessment of this application, Councillor Buttle, so I don't think it's the right arena to raise that comment or question here.
Okay.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't involved in this last meeting on this, so just a couple of questions, Chris. I'm happy to second Councillor Slack's movement. I don't think this is a big issue, but I have to say I did raise my eyes a bit because in all the years I've been on planning, I've never known us go against highways. Okay, so that's where we're coming from. Is this absolutely vital need for this applicant, this access? I don't know the history of it, so forgive me.
Yeah, it's a finely balanced judgment, really, and I think the applicant has explained that they don't own the existing access. They have a lease arrangement, so I'm assuming they pay an amount of money each year to the owner of that access to use it in order to be able to access their property. As an authority, we were made aware of an access that had been formed onto a classified road, and we served an enforcement notice to require the closure of that access. There was an issue, and it's explained in section 2.2 of this report, that the owner of the field had died, and we'd served the notice on that particular person. So it prevented the applicant from being able to appeal against that decision to serve an enforcement notice. And we considered it appropriate in the circumstances to allow them to invite an application to be at least, if we're minded to refuse the application, to test that at appeal. What they've done is they've gone away and they've appointed a highway consultant to have a look at this, and in their professional opinion, they feel that there is some betterment and it wouldn't be prejudicial to highway safety. And we've taken a pragmatic view, and we've assessed their comments. We've discussed it with the Highway Authority also. They can understand our point of view, but from a strictly highway engineering perspective and based on current standards, it doesn't quite meet current standards, hence why their recommendation is one of objection still.
Okay. As I say, I'm happy to second it.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Donnelly?
Thank you, Chair. Has it been seconded?
Yep.
Councillor
Purdy.
Yeah, well, I was going to propose unseconded because I think it strikes me as rather strange that highways are objecting to this application, which is about 300 metres down the road. They've allowed a development in a lethal part, what we call Toppery Hollow. Those who know the area very well, I went past there yesterday. I don't see any problem at all with the access, because as you come from Ashbourne to Wyeston, you come round a bend, but it's a very, very steep hill, so the speed is down anyway. Coming the other way around, there's still very good visibility. So it's strange that, in the first place, I say that the county council would object to it, but no, I think it's a big improvement. Those have known from many years back. There was very poor visibility out of that access, out of that display itself. So I think this is a big improvement, and I'm very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Archie?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I was happy to move or second it. I think the Highways Agency are just looking at it from the technical point of view that it doesn't meet their standards, but I think Chris's word of term pragmatic is absolutely spot on. It's definitely an improvement. Going back to the point Councillor Gamble made, I would say it would make this road safer for the people who live there coming out onto the road, but also safer for other residents and other road users using the road, because there's less chance that something's going to pull out in front of them and they're going to hit it, because they're going to be able to see traffic from further away. So again, I use this road all the time, very regularly, and the current access is in a dangerous place. This is not perfect. Understood. I understand why the Highways Agency therefore have got concerns, because it's not perfect, but it's a hell of an improvement to what we've currently got. So I will completely support it as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alter. So I've moved in debate. It's been moved and seconded. Anybody else want to talk in debate? Councillor O'Brien.
Well, I don't support the application, but I don't want to address that issue the principle at the moment. What I would say is that if you want to reduce the impact of an access in the open countryside, you don't tarmacadam it. You have a narrow as possible width, a 2.5 metre crushed stone width, and you have a central grass reservation. The impact of tarmacadding a driveway is effectively to suburbanise the development rather than to integrate it within the landscape. So if the application were to be approved, I would put forward an amendment such that we don't support the access being having a tarmacadam finish, but it has a crushed stone finish with a let's say a 500 millimetre central grass reservation. I think those of us who live in well, those of us who know open countryside areas will understand the difference between having a crushed stone track and a suburban tar macadam access road.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think I've got to. As a member of the county council, although I have every sympathy with the applicants, I can't go against the advice of Derbyshire County Council Highways.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barefoot. Councillor Sewell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to mention anything, but I think one of the comments that Councillor Purdy said in his first breath, in all the time he's been on planning, we've never gone against County Council and the highways. We've always looked at them, and if they've said no, then no. But obviously, listening to what Chris has said, that they've spoken, saying, you know, it's the lesser of all evils to actually have that, and I can understand the point of not making it tarmac and the likes, which Councillor O'Brien has been stating. So with this, the practicality of it, then I have been swayed to actually go and support this now. But it's quite heavy-hearted, as the fact is the one and only time we're ever going to be turning around and saying we're not listening to what the County Council's got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Will you accept an amendment, Chair, that the finish is revised to
he
the
needs seconding.
Chair, can I speak on that, please?
Yeah, of course, and only if it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
I'd like the advice from our respected Solicitor Kelly, because I personally don't think we can force this or implement this or recommend this to the applicant. I really don't.
I think that's up to you as a committee to put forward the motion, to second it, and then to vote on whether to include it or not. I think that's the fairest way to proceed, if it does find a seconder.
So thank you very much. So we'll vote on the amendment. Yeah, Chris.
Just to come back on that point, Chair, I think members, if they were minded to put that deferment or sorry, that amendment to the motion, just need to have regard to what the applicant said at section 2.8. So officers have equally raised concerns about the visual impact of the access, but what you need to consider is being designed specifically to serve a purpose of accommodating vehicle movements. It's been designed with the expertise of a highway engineer that's looked at it, and they're also proposing to reduce the width of it where they can, proposing passing places, and they're also proposing quite a detailed planting scheme with heavy standard trees spaced every 5 metres along the route of the access. We've assessed that, and we consider with those changes to the current access, we feel that it would result in acceptable landscape impact. So I think as officers, if you were to disagree with that view, I think you need to explain the reasons why you disagree with it, but also what you expect of the applicant, so that we can somehow frame that in a condition.
So, as a point of information, Chair, that's the specification of crushed stone with a central grass reservation. Those of us in the National Park will know that that is a standard access requirement for residential development, isolated residential development in the countryside, and in fact the National Park consistently takes enforcement action against developers who put tarmac tracks in fields. So I don't think there'd be, a point of information, I don't think there'd be any engineering difficulty in the applicant accepting that specification without the tarmac binding course.
So, it's been with the amendment. So we'll vote on the amendment first. All those in favour of the... Well, yeah. If we're looking more clear, have you got any more clearer wording for it, Councillor O'Brien?
Well, it's to the effect that the tarmac binding course is replaced by a bound crushed stone finish incorporating a suitably width grass central reservation in order to minimise the visual impact of the access track.
I think members in voting on that amendment would have to be satisfied that the access as presented with the supplementary or proposed landscaping is unacceptable in landscape terms and would only be acceptable with this amendment, because we'd have to propose the amendment and suggest a condition to agree those changes, but to impose the condition it has to meet the test and it has to be reasonably necessary, or it has to serve a purpose and be relevant to the proposal. So I think members would have to be satisfied that was the case in this instance.
Isn't that what we'd be voting on? That we consider it to be an imperative part of, if members were minded to vote for it, that it should be made to look like a country track, not a suburban track.
But it's how you would deal with that change as a result of this application. So we've got an application that's presented in the manner that's presented to us, so we've got clear proposals in terms of what's proposed. So you'd have to be satisfied that what is proposed is unacceptable, to propose something else for us then to be able to condition it, and for that condition to meet the test of acceptability.
As a point of order, Chair, do I understand though that it was in fact at officers' request that the tarmac cladding wearing course was added? The applicant was happy originally to have it as it is.
Wasn't the one thing that you enforced a stone track?
Yeah, it's not a stone track as it's as for members that have visited the site, they'll see that it's of a width and nature that's not a bound stone surface that Councillor
It might not
described.
have been bound. I did go to the site and I did see it, and it is stone. It might not be bound, but it is stone.
The photograph that's on the presentation moment shows the width and nature of that access track, so it's not of a nature that's been described. So if you want it to be different to that, I don't think it's a case of retaining what's there, because that's not what you've described.
Okay, Councillor Buttle.
Thank you very much. This is just a bit hopeful, but can we just provide them with outline planning permission for a track with a bit of grass down the middle, and we can't include that into it. It just can't be done.
No, because the application's a full application, not an outline application, so we're discussing what's actually in the paperwork.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's just like we seem to be making things difficult for ourselves.
Councillor Bull.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the clarification upon this, and Chris put us to 2.8, saying, and it does say on it, with regard to the visual impact, officers raised concern regarding the appearance of the proposal of the tarmac exiting the surface. To this end, the adjacent has been advised and the following works are proposed. So they've proposed to change it into pasture land rather than it being a tarmac lane all the way up and the likes anyway, according to this. So is that not sufficing to what we're actually saying that's there? So in sense, what's written in here, if we're approving the actual thing, we don't want it tarmacked, and that's in what they've got there. It's not going to be tarmacked all the way up. Is that not what we're voting on this application?
Just to be clear, I think what they're saying is that the width of the access, so the area of land that has been stoned across the site entrance will be reduced, and the area of stone excluded from the new access road will be replaced by pasture. So it's dealing with the width and the extent of hard surfacing works, if you like, that's been carried out in this case. But my understanding is the proposal is that the access, because it talks in paragraph 2, to the new access will be reduced to 5-metre wide tarmac road. The intention is to tarmac it, but to reduce its extent, if that makes sense.
I thought it was just going to carry on as pasture land. It was just the exiting bit. because I've read it wrong, obviously, within this. So, okay, sorry, thank you.
That's quite all right, Councillor. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when we worked for the Environment Agency, what they used to do in this situation was to put a stone base down and then screen it over the top with light soil and grass it, and then the grass is there, but they've got a stone base underneath for traction. If you just literally put grass down on its own, it'll make a mess that it'll all cut up. So you need the stone base underneath, and then you can grass over, topsoil over it and grass it, and then it's more environmental altogether then.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Slack. I think we've exhausted everything at the moment, so what I need to do is recap what the amendment will be, and the first vote will be on the amendment. So we could have a recap on the amendment.
I'll try and understand what that amendment is. I think, Councillor Bryan, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here. It's to seek an amendment on the basis that the proposed track is unacceptable in terms of its landscape impact, and a better alternative would be to have an access of a more agricultural appearance with a bound surface, albeit stoned surface, with a grass strip down the middle, and a scheme to be submitted which follows the general parameters of that approach.
Okay.
I think Councillor Bryan's happy with that.
So anyway, members, so we've got to vote on the amendment first. So all those in favour of the amendment, please show. I've gone to the... You are voting for the amendment that Councillor O'Brien put forward to try and regularise it and make it look more... No, because we take the amendment first and then we go back. Okay, so anyway, just to recap, we are voting on the amendment that's set out by Councillor O'Brien. So all those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So the motion has been defeated. We go therefore back to the substantive motion, which has been moved and seconded by Councillor Slack and Councillor Purdy. So all those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So that's been carried. It's been approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, moving swiftly on. Item 5.3, which is proposed demolition of existing building, erection of care home use class C2 with associated parking, access and landscaping at Lees Farm, Wineston Road, Ashbourne. I have got one speaker on this, but before we go to the speaker, there's some late representation. So if you'd like to take a minute to have a look through that, and then we'll move on. Okay, members. So I have one speaker on this. It could be Miss Karina Johnson or Miss Anna Gillings, agent, to speak. The microphone's on. You have 5 minutes, and I'll indicate when there's 30 seconds left.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. So my name is Corinne Johnson. I'm from Gillings Planning. We are the planning agents acting for Perseus Land and Developments in this application. Perseus are a leading developer in the care home sector, and you probably remember that they submitted a scheme last year for a care home and 9 dwellings on the site, and this scheme was refused last June. At the time, the committee recognized that there is an urgent need for a new care home in Ashbourne. This position was endorsed by the adult social care team at Derbyshire County Council. I believe that you were keen to see the site redeveloped, but you felt that you couldn't support the design of the scheme. So you invited us to review it and to submit a new application. And that's exactly what we've done. We went back to the drawing board. We revised the scheme completely to address all the previous reasons for refusal of the previous application. And I'm pleased to say that the officer agrees and has recommended the scheme for approval. The first reason for refusal was to do with the scale and size of the development. And importantly, we have now removed the 9 dwellings that we were previously proposing, and the application is now only for a care home on the site. We have also significantly reduced the scale and mass of the care home. So before we were proposing a 2.5-story high building, and now it's predominantly a single-story building, utilizing the roof space. While we are proposing a slight increase in bedrooms, so it's 70 bedrooms versus 64 previously, the new building will therefore be slightly longer as a result, but the main point is that it is now much smaller much smaller in height. And this is the compromise that we've had to make to be able to reduce the scale while still achieving a financially viable scheme. The second reason for refusal was related to the impact of the building on immediate neighbours. So obviously, reducing the scale of the building has made a big difference in that respect. The case officer confirms in her report that appropriate separation distances can be achieved, and her conclusion is that the impact of the scheme on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties will not be significant. Finally, during the pre-application process, we have engaged with the council's case officers and with immediate neighbours. We have tried to incorporate as much as possible of their feedback into the scheme. We have also satisfied all the technical consultees, including highways, who are happy with access and the parking provision. And of course, we welcome the control conditions applied. To conclude, I will just reiterate 2 main points. First of all, the case officer agrees that we have addressed fully the reasons for refusal of the previous application. And second, there is no objection from statutory consultees, and we have resolved all the technical matters to their satisfaction. So this is a high-quality development which will provide much-needed care home beds in Ashbourne, and we hope that the planning committee will be able to support our application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyway, members, questions? Oh, no, sorry. Who's doing this? Are you doing it, Sarah? Sorry.
Right, we visited the site yesterday in the rain. So we're looking at a 70-bed care home for the elderly. And within the scheme, there's amenity facilities, including a cafe, dining rooms, lounges, a cinema and hairdressers. There's a recognised need for such accommodation within the district. As the agent has just said, extensive amendments have been made since the previous application, and we feel they've taken on board the refusal reasons previously, and it's resulted in a building that would sit comfortably within its context. It's considered that the proposal continues. It's considered the proposal is appropriate redevelopment of the site in terms of its scale, form, massing, design and detailing that outweighs the loss of the farmhouse and farm buildings. On the site, there is a TPO and the Scots pines within that TPO, and the good quality trees on the site frontage on Wyreston Road have been retained. An extensive assessment has been made in terms of the relationships of existing properties on Premier Avenue and the development under construction at Henmore Gardens, and these are not considered significant and have overcome the previous reason for refusal. Another point to add is, whilst I'm not able to add a condition regarding the fire service's request for an automatic sprinkler system, we can include an informative on that respect. Happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Chair. Yes, we did the site visit again yesterday, and I was quite impressed with the reapplication, as it were, because I think that the previous one was a bit overbearing. I'm also happy with the fact that the screening now will be carried out unconditional. I'm not convinced that we could get sprinkler system in at this stage. I think it's a request actually from the feedback from the Derbyshire Fires and Rescue Service, but I think it was just a request, if I remember rightly. But I think it is a good scheme. I think we look around the population of Ashbourne, myself included. You never know, one day you might need a bed there, you never know. So we're quite happy to, you never know, do you? Well, time moves on. Anyway, that said, I think that the improvements have been made, and we look around also that the requirement on serious note for elderly in Ashbourne and district, I think it's 70 beds is a great added to the application. So I'm very happy to move the application of recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I was going to move and second it, but I prefer the Ashbourne members to do so. If Councillor Archer wants to second it, I think it's a valued need for Ashbourne.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it and agree with everything Councillor Donnelly said, really. I think it's nice to have a facility like this. We've had so much new housing in that area, so many families moving in there, and it's going to be nice for them to have a potential facility to move elderly relatives in there where they can be visited easily in residential areas and so on. I really like the fact they've lowered the height down because I think that was a concern with the original plan. I think that's a real big improvement. So absolutely, yeah. Although, without being rude, it might not be quite as close to needing it as you, Tom.
Not there yet.
You know, my parents, my mum might be. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I would like to happily second it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm very happy to support this as well. I think this is where planning works at its best, where we've had pre-planning advice, we've had discussions with the planning officer, and I wish them all success, assuming that it gets approved tonight. I am a member of the Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service Authority, and I noticed under 5.8, I did bring this up at the site visit, that they are recommending automatic sprinklers, and I realise that we can't condition this, but through the agent, I would urge the owners, the developer, to seriously consider this sprinklers at the building stage, because they are considerably cheaper to install at the building stage, and I'm confident that someone from DFRS would be happy to give you advice.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Burfoot. So I think we'll add that as a footnote to the decision notice. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I support this. There's a great need for care homes and also carers as well, like the shorter carers. But I fully support this because it's what we all need sometime later on in life. So, yeah, I support this, Chair, and I support...
well, I think I'll be all right for the bit because I'm the youngest here of this committee, so
I also support
it won't be for
carers.
me for a bit.
And I support carers getting more money than what they're getting now because they do a very valuable job. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Pete. Anybody else wanted to speak in debate? Councillor Bottle.
Will be supported by air source heat pumps. What we don't know is whether or not the air source heat pumps
don't know whether or not there's any forward planning for green measures in the future, but currently they're looking at reducing 160 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year to 145, as far as I can tell, by using those air source heat pumps. So I'm hoping that there will be some forward planning to improve that impact. And I was wondering if in future we could certainly ask a little bit more about future-proofing the designs of these buildings.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Buttle. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Like others, fully support this application, and I'd just like to echo what other members have said about it. Like yourself, I'm not quite ready to go there just yet, but it's nice to see that the applicant has taken on board what we said when we refused it and come back with, to me, this much better scheme. So fully support it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lees. So it's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So that's been carried unanimously, so it's been approved. Thank you very much, members. And our last item of business for today is item 5.4, which is application number 21/01278, full conversion of outbuildings to holiday let with raising of roof and associated alterations at Southbound, Overton, Hognaston. Now, there is no late representation on this. We have one speaker, and that's Mr. Jim Malkin, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, and then I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thanks, Chairman. I can assure you I won't be taking all 5 minutes, that's for
lovely.
sure. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. The officer's report recommends refusal on 2 grounds which will both be considered in turn. The first reason for refusal infers that the proposals will be unsustainably located and would harm the character of the building and its surroundings. The site is located in a popular area with visitors. It lies within walking distance of the Knockerdown Inn and Carsington Water, and is conveniently located relative to the Peak District. There are several camping and caravan sites in the immediate vicinity, and the tourism infrastructure is therefore well established in this area. The proposals are therefore sustainably located relative to their intended function. Domestic tourism has substantially increased over the past couple of years, and is likely to remain popular as the carbon footprint of air travel is under increasing scrutiny. The proposals would deliver the social and economic benefits of providing a quiet holiday location off the beaten track for both walkers and those that enjoy outdoor activities. The Council's policies do not express or infer any preference for tourism conversions to derive from traditional buildings. The garage is a relatively modern structure, but it is nonetheless established in the landscape and is of permanent and substantial construction. The increase in the height of the building is modest. It will be raised by just 0.6 metres, and will therefore retain a lower ridge height than the applicant's barn. The building will remain subservient to the applicant's barn in visual terms. We do propose a dormer window. This is to maximise the benefit of attractive views across Carsington Water. If preferred by members, this could however be achieved using roof lights instead, therefore maintaining the existing roof profile. The proposals are therefore sustainably located and respect the character of their surroundings. As such, the scheme is compliant with the Council's policy relating to tourism facilities and will have significant economic benefits and support local facilities. The second reason for refusal relates to the lack of a bat survey. The Derbyshire Wildlife Trust appears to be under the misapprehension that the garage is a barn, which it is not. The loft space of the garage is boarded and is currently used for domestic storage. A preliminary ecological appraisal can be prepared and submitted to confirm that the building does not present a roosting opportunity should the committee require further reassurance. I hope that sufficient justification has been provided to address your officer's concerns, and hope that members are able to promote tourism and its associated benefits in the district and grant planning permission in this instance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Very succinct. Before we move on, I'll just propose a extension to the meeting because we're going up to 2.5 hours. So I'll extend 15 minutes. So shall we say 8:45? Councillor Donnelly? Yep. All those in favour? So we have an extension to 8:45. Okay, so carrying swiftly on. Questions? Members? Oh, officer, sorry, it's all right. Who's doing this one? Oh, okay, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. There's three issues to consider in respect of this application. So you'll note from the officer's report that this garage was erected in 1996. It's a relatively modern building within the context of a converted barn. We feel we do have policies in the local plan which support the conversion of buildings that have historic or architectural interest in the landscape and worthy of protection and reuse. In this case, you've got an ancillary outbuilding to a domestic property, which at best has a neutral impact on its surroundings. It doesn't, in officers' opinion, is a building that warrants conversion because of its contribution to the landscape. So there's that issue of principle in terms of the conversion of the building. There's a lack of information in relation to its suitability to accommodate protected species. And there's also a concern about the degree of alteration and extension to the building, changing its appearance quite significantly from what is a very simple garage building to something that's almost hybrid in appearance in terms of its end use. And we're recommending refusal for all three grounds in effect. So happy to take questions at this stage.
A couple of questions. The policy EC8, policy which promotes tourism. Now, this is, I accept this falls into a residential use class, but it's in fact a tourism project. Does policy EC8, do our tourism policies make any requirement for such facilities to be sustainably located? That's my first question. My second question relates to the consent given some time ago, I accept, to the conversion of the former South Barn. Was any issues raised when that permission was granted in relation to the sustainability of that as a new residential development?
I'll try and answer those questions. So in policy EC8, you've got the second bullet point, which talks about supporting tourism and provision for visitors, which is appropriate to the settlements and countryside and consistent with environmental objectives. And one of those objectives is sustainability of location. So that's why we've sort of considered that in the round and we've come to the conclusion that we have in the reason for refusal number one. It comes back in terms of the second question to the contribution the building makes to its surroundings. I'm not familiar with the other site that you've mentioned, but I'm assuming it's a building of architectural or historic interest that perhaps is made a much greater contribution to the landscape and its surroundings in this building. This building is a garage that was erected in 1996. It's a simple building which at best has a neutral impact on its surroundings. It's not a building that we would consider is worthy of conversion and reuse as an exception to normal rules which restrict development in countryside locations like this.
Just to come back on that, Jem, I'm looking at paragraph 1.1 in your report, where you refer to South Barn, which is the adjoining building. My question is, when that was, were there any issues there as to whether or not that was in a sustainable location when permission was given to convert an agricultural building into a dwelling?
Sorry, Councillor O'Brien, I understand what you're saying. South Barn is the main dwelling on the site. South Barn was a former farm building. It's been on site for some years, and in officers' view, it did contribute positively to its surroundings. It was a farm building that was an integral part of the landscape. This is a modest outbuilding to that property. It's not. We don't consider it's the same assessment in policy terms.
So there was no sustainability issue there?
No, because plan policies do support conversion and reuse of existing buildings in the countryside to residential use, and holiday let is a form of residential use. What the policy requires is that building makes a positive contribution to its surroundings. It talks specifically, the preamble to the policy, to buildings of historic or architectural interest that contribute to the landscape. We don't feel that this building fits that criteria.
Okay. Councillor Mrs. Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about sustainability as well. We've obviously got a difference of view between the applicant and the agent in this thorny issue of sustainability. So I just wondered if Chris could just sort of clarify why this is believed to be an unsustainable form of development. I always have a problem with this, just for a bit of clarification, please.
Yeah, there's a couple of strands to that. So we're dealing with here with a relatively modern outbuilding to a domestic property in the countryside. So we don't consider, in sustainability terms, the conversion of that building to a separate form of residential accommodation, all the associated traffic movements associated with that use as a sustainable form of development. We feel that the location is remote from basic services and facilities. So anyone holidaying on the site would be heavily reliant on the private motor vehicle to go to the shop, to access basic provisions. There's limited access to public transport, and we feel that in that sense the location isn't a sustainable one for this type of development.
Does that help you out, Councillor Burford? Yep. Does that help you out?
Yes, thank you.
Any more questions, members, before we move into debate? Councillor Lees, and we'll move into debate.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Chris, would your decision still be the same? I mean, the agent stated that he'd be willing to remove the gable end and put roof windows in. Would your decision still be the same, or would this need another application, or would the decision still be the same?
As I mentioned at the beginning, there's three strands to our recommendation to refuse the application. I think if the building was to retain its existing appearance, then that potentially eliminates the strand which deals with the changes and alterations having an adverse impact on the character and appearance of this building and the setting of the adjacent barn. But it doesn't address the principle of converting what is a modest, modern outbuilding to a converted barn that contributes, in officers' view, little to the landscape.
Okay. Any more members? So we're in debate. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, well, I think our officers have got this right. I mean, it is a question of balance always. We want to encourage tourism, of course we do, but in this circumstance and on merit, I'm going to go with officers' recommendation for refusal. On a point of note, I would like to think the officers would make sure that Councillor Rose's name is not included in any future applications. I think that's a sensitive issue that needs addressing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does that find a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Burfoot, do you want to speak against it?
No, I think the officers have got it right on this one, on balance.
Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you. Well, I pushed this forward to committee, sort of with my tourism hat on, because obviously, I've taken over some of the applications in the Carsington ward, and usually I'm here before you defending people who want to convert dilapidated old vernacular barns into something more positive in the landscape, as I try and do in my ward and in other wards in the national park. Having reflected over this one and seen and spoken to neighbours and things, and seen the actual building itself in the flesh, and I'm just looking back at the photographs I took yesterday, this was built in the 80s or 90s, and there it is again, and it's not in danger of falling over or having a reuse because it's already used for something at the moment. So I think on reflection the officers have come to the right decision on this one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Anybody else wanted to speak in debate? Councillor Gamble.
I was going to second the recommendation, actually. Yeah, I think the officers have got it right on this point, and also I had come thinking it being brought forward for approval, and I was going to say, I mean, there's so little detail about how this was built. I don't think we could possibly approve it tonight, purely on the lack of information of how it would be heated, what would be the services there, and everything else, and the biodiversity and everything else that we normally put within the application.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded for refusal. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? So that's unanimously refused. Anyway, thank you very much, members. So now there's only just a little bit of housekeeping to do. What we need to do now is item 6, information on active and closed enforcement investigation, which is for noting. I therefore move. Seconder. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. And the last one is appeals progress report. That's just for noting. So I therefore move. Seconded, Councillor Donnelly. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much,
Chair,
members.
before you close the
Yes.
meeting, if I may just speak, I'd like to congratulate Chris on his promotion. I don't know if it's public knowledge, but it is now. I think it's well deserved. There were applicants for the post for John Bradbury, and I think you're going to fill his shoes very well.
Sorry, Chris.
Was it public knowledge?
Thank you. I've not signed the contract yet, but no, it was disappointing.
Well, with time to change our mind.
Yeah. No, I'm extremely grateful for being given the opportunity, and it was just disappointing from my perspective. There was a general lack of interest in that particular post. But I like to think I'm in planning for the right reasons, and I'm committed to this authority and making sound planning decisions and consistent decisions. So look forward to working with you all in the future.
Well, Chris, you've got a hard act to follow, but I'm sure you'll do well.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, congratulations, Chris, and we'll be working a bit more closer with you and we'll see where we go. Anyway, congratulations.